you're not getting sick of me. This is my third and last appearance, so you can move on to others. So Romeo Kinsler, you have a new job, in fact. I mean, you went from IBM Watson to this new role at IBM, and it's pertinent to what we're going to talk about. So why don't you tell us, first of all, about your new role?
Yeah, so 1st of April, I moved to the Center for Open Source Data and AI Technologies in San Francisco. And that's basically a cross of the business line organization which ensures that the open source parts in all our products are being taken care of. So we have a lot of contributors to open source. I think we are around 83 people at the moment.
Right, okay. So the key word here, I think, for the purposes of this discussion are the words open source, right? We've got to figure out how we are going to manage the data that is going into these new, deep learning AI systems. How do we ensure that is done in a way that maintains integrity in the interest of the human beings for which that technology is supposed to serve? So in the light of that, tell us a little bit about what you think is most exciting in this space, but what are you most worried about as well?
Okay, so the most exciting thing at the moment is that we had a couple of breakthroughs. That means that actually there never have been so many people working at solving AI problems than now. So we are right in the beginning, but since so many people are working on it and a lot of people are working in the open, we are doing a lot of progress for humanity. And the thing which scares me the most at the moment is not the AI itself. So we won't have that Terminator which is killing us. We might have a Terminator which is killing us, which is controlled by humans. And the problem is, on the one side, the humans which have the trust in the AI, and the large corporates which are controlling the AI to manipulate the humans, which is already happening now.
Right, and from a legal perspective, a corporation is a person, right? Yeah. So what's going on there, right? Because there's this whole model that we've built over the last century that essentially incentivizes the accumulation of information for the purposes of profit seeking within that corporation. In the realm of this new digital age, with all this data being critical to that, what is the core problem and how are we going to solve it? So we've got companies that are essentially controlling the data that will dictate these things. Talk to us a little bit about what the core problem is.
Yeah, that's basically the core problem. The core problem is that you are all giving away your data for free, because you're getting something back now. So, for example, if my travel agent sends me an email in which hotel I'm staying and I'm opening my Maps application, I'm seeing where I'm staying. So that's pretty cool for me, and I don't really realize that this could be a problem. So it's not a problem which affects me personally, but it affects the whole humanity, because actually the data gets centralized even more, so there is an information cartel forming. Only a couple of large-scale companies are actually owning the data, and if you are in machine learning, you will notice really fast that the algorithm is not that important. So most of the algorithms we are using at the moment are like 20 years old. The important thing is data. So if you have the data, you can build models of the world, you can build models of the humans, and finally control them.
Right. It's almost as if we are moving into the matrix already, right?
Yeah,
I think that's the concern here. I thought about this myself because I come from the background of blockchain technologies and digital currencies, and I sort of thought about how do we apply blockchain, which people originally thought of as something to do purely with money, to the internet world, and it struck me that the real concern was that we didn't recognize that data was essentially a form of money, that data, in fact, was a currency. And that once you are trying, what blockchain tries to solve is the trust problem. How do we actually manage a value exchange between two peers when we don't necessarily trust each other? And in a decentralized setting like the internet, that is the core problem. So since we didn't solve that problem, we fixed packet switching of data itself, but we couldn't fix the value problem. People basically just started giving away their data, not understanding that they were building these entities in the middle to control them in the center of it. So obviously there's an awareness that needs to come from people that their data is essentially a currency, that they themselves are actors in the system and therefore are being manipulated by this algorithm. What can the individual do? I mean, how can we actually, because all that free stuff you talk about is really useful, right?
Yeah.
So what can I as an individual do in that context?
Okay, so I think the first stage is that developers who are actually know the technology are starting to educate the others and also are trying to make the technology more usable from a privacy perspective. So for example, I myself, I have operating system on my phone. It's a Fairphone, which is called Lineage OS. So it has no Google software on it. And also my contacts are not shared with Google. They are encrypted and then sent to a cloud provider. This is all an open source ecosystem.
You call it a Fairphone, is that right?
It's a Fairphone, yeah.
So we're going to move away from smartphones to Fairphones. That sounds like a great new terminology to use. Okay.
So, and also, for example, if I'm roaming around, then I'm contributing my location data, the Wi-Fi data, and all that stuff to Mozilla. Everybody can use it. So I think there are two approaches. Either you keep your data private with yourself, or you just share it with everybody. That mitigates the problem.
Right. So, there's also this problem we talk about quite a lot in terms of bias in either the algorithm, but also in, I suppose, the learning process that comes from the data. How do we manage for that? How do we manage for this problem of bias?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question. So one quote, I don't have the original author in my mind at the moment, is that AI is getting racist if it's trained in a racist world. So if the world is racist, the AI will also get racist. There are toolkits. So IBM actually, our center, is open sourcing a toolkit called the Fairness 360 toolkit, which actually detects bias and also can mitigate bias. So you can change the algorithm that the bias is removed. That's the first step. But in my vision, we should be able to replicate the algorithm. So we don't have to trust the corporation that the actual algorithm isn't biased. And we have another open source tool which is called a model asset exchange, where we exchange freely the AI models. But now half of the developers we assigned to the DAX, the data asset exchange. So we have open data there, and the model plus the data will allow us, or will allow everybody to retrain the model, to rerun the bias detection toolkit and actually audit and verify himself whether this algorithm can be trusted or not. So that's
so almost like the bias detection model itself can evolve as well, because I mean there is this concern. Somebody mentioned that one solution people are talking about inside companies is have one single ethical administrator, right?
Yep.
That's a single person's view of what the ethics should be. That's in itself a bias, right?
Yeah.
So deciding what bias is can be a biased problem. Do we have the capacity to therefore essentially incorporate a breadth of opinions, almost like a democracy, if you like, to determine whether or not this algorithm is behaving biasly, and can that evolve as social norms evolve?
Yeah, that's the decentralization of the problem. No? So you remove the single authority, and basically everybody who wants can audit it and spread his opinion. And we have a democracy. We can vote against it because we do the same lobbying and media and manipulation will happen again. But at least you have the chance to audit the algorithm and fight against it if we find that it's, for example, racist or against women.
Okay. Why don't we just go to one of these questions to start with here. The first one says, we are talking about human-computer interaction and human AI interaction. What's next? Are we going to move to human-AI collaboration or AI-human replacement?
It's collaboration, and it's a bit scary. So I've watched a TED Talk. Unfortunately, I don't know the title. So the guy was saying that the AI and the humans have been working in concert. So the AI told the robots and the humans what to do, and basically all together they built something better. So, and I was getting scared when he said that. No?
But why? Because you think that we humans are liable to encode dangerous things into it?
No, I think it's the movement of us behind the API. No? So, for example, the Uber driver is behind the API. No? The Uber system tells the driver, go there, do this, without any possibility for him to have his own opinion about it.
Right.
And that's the same like the Amazon Mechanical Turk. This whole problem, we are all getting more and more the Mechanical Turks of AI, and that's the question whether we
This
want
is the
that.
behavior modification aspect of the algorithm. So what then, in some respects what's scary about that is that the rules are being imposed upon us without us even knowing that those rules exist, right? So you can only, we know that the speed limit is 60 miles an hour, and we make a conscious decision to not go above it. But in fact, the Uber driver is literally not understanding what that hidden algorithm is doing behind them. So what role then for traditional rule makers, regulators, politicians, what role should they play in defining the framework for how all this works out?
I think eventually we should get to a point where we have laws which enforce the information cartel to make data public. And because in the context of machine learning, everybody was talking about, data is the new oil. But in the context of AI, my opinion is that data is the new plutonium. So it's like has the power of nuclear weapons.
Capacity, yes.
And that has to be controlled.
Data is the new plutonium. That's another one. Fair phones and data is the new plutonium. I think I might borrow those.
Okay.
So we talked a little bit earlier on as well about the choice between encrypting the data. It's almost like from a cypherpunk perspective, there's two extremes. Like everything should be encrypted, everything should be private. There should be no. But reality is, these systems to be effective will require a lot of open data. So the other extreme is make everything public. Where do you sit on that spectrum, and what is the choices that need to be made in terms of
I think
design?
the individual should have the right to decide that. I think he should decide where in the spectrum he wants to go. He can decide, I put all my data to some provider, I'm happy. I told you before about the prisoner's dilemma. No? So I have the advantage if I give my data to a large corporation because I get good services in return, but in the long term it will affect humanity. So I think you should have the right to decide, and of course you need open data, and if it doesn't hurt you, just make it open.
Right, but I mean, if I'm going to make the decision because I understand where it is, and now I know it's plutonium, and therefore I have to make a very conscious decision around that, what's my moral imperative? Should I be insisting that I actually pay Google for the services I'm receiving, or should, on the other hand, be insisting, I keep on using Google, it could be any company, that company is now going to pay me for my data, because my individual data is not usually, it's very difficult to define what that is. It's only in aggregate that it's powerful. So, there's an economic exchange there. What is the ideal, marketplace that should emerge around that?
Okay. Yeah, I would say it's on the spectrum of the open data, no? Because we don't want to have a small set of large companies controlling the data. That's what's a pain for the humanity. Right. In contrast, if we have a lot of open data, we can run a lot of algorithms which improve humanity. If it's, for example, how people are roaming around on the streets with cars and bicycles, all that what's happening in Google Maps, for example, should be open, no? Because it gives too much power to single entities, and they can basically control. For example, I was driving in a taxi in Bangalore, and the taxi driver had Google Maps, and I had Google Maps, and at a certain junction, Google sent the taxi driver to the right, and myself straight. So they are doing A/B testing. So you are actually working for Google and trying out the routes in the map, and they incorporate that in the corpus. So I think that's, to a certain extent, it's beneficial to everybody, but you are misused as a guinea pig.
I have this argument with my wife all the time about Waze, because she's always right, and I'm convinced that it's not always right. Maybe because it's testing each of us out, and we are viewed differently from those two perspectives.
And in the same time analyzing your psychological profile.
Right, that's really interesting. So let's just have another one here. Let's see. How do we make sure that everyone has access to data needed to solve the greatest problems of humanity, not just large tech companies? So this is interesting about the question of not just ensuring that we make it open, but how do I get access to it? How can I build my own startup on top of that data? What do I need to do?
Yeah, so the question is, where does the data come from? Right. So there are the genomic projects, and people are just obliged to make this data accessible, so you find a lot of open data there. But as I said, I think law enforcement eventually needs to control it, because it's such a threat to humanity that actually not opening up the data will prevent the growth of humanity, because all the models are being kept as a secret in the large corporations and actually are not usable for us. No?
Now we keep talking about large corporations. There's a little company called IBM.
Yeah.
It's a fairly large corporation, actually. And so you're coming out from this perspective.
Yep.
You're employed by IBM.
Yep.
You have, some would argue that IBM, regardless of its positive intent to be open with its data and its algorithms, by virtue of being such a big player in the marketplace, has the capacity to essentially manipulate the outcomes in its shareholders' interest, because ultimately that's whose IBM's management are responsible to. So how do you resolve for that? How does IBM itself, and how do you as an individual working for IBM work within that system? Do you really believe that it's going to act in the broad interest of humanity?
Yeah, so there are multiple answers to that. So the first is, if there is some law going to happen, then it of course affects IBM as well as Google and Facebook. So I'm totally okay with that. On the other hand, IBM clearly states that we never ever use our clients' data for training and improving our AI models. I think there are not many companies who are doing that. And then our research department is heavily investigating in ways how to, for example, train machine learning algorithms in a federated way, so the data can reside at the institution and we only run the algorithms. Then we are, for example, working on a thing called privacy, I forgot the name, differential privacy, it's called. That means you can actually obfuscate your data by adding random noise, which allows still algorithms to be trained, but it's going hard to do the reverse, to get the personal information back. So those are things which are happening at IBM Research and which are very, very interesting. And
since you mentioned that obfuscation of data, one of the things that I've been interested in is how truly private can any encrypted data become? Because clearly, I can remove all the PII, the personal identifying information, and I might be able to send all sorts of signal, noise, confusion into the data. But these machines are incredibly intelligent, and there's all these powerful mechanisms to identify that, in fact, that unidentifiable numerical signifier is, in fact, Romeo, right?
Yeah.
How do we, can we build a system that will allow encrypted data to nonetheless maintain my privacy when this capacity to understand the analytics of the machine is so powerful?
Yeah, that's interesting. So as I mentioned, there are the three technologies at the moment. One is this differentiable privacy. There is a parameter epsilon in it, which actually defines how hard it is to reconstruct the data. So the higher the value, the harder it is. But then, of course, the value of the data is also decreasing. Then you have the homomorphic encryption. That's where you can train algorithms on the encrypted data and still get the same result without being able to read the data. And the third one is the federated model, where you trust a single entity to keep your data private, but still allow you, for example, to do data mining on it. So one interesting thing I noticed, even in Switzerland, the electronic health records are actually accessible by the pharma companies in an anonymous way to do research about their drugs. So I was a bit shocked about that fact, but it's actually the federated model.
You're being ghosted right now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt. We're out of time, but we do want to give you a little more time to answer those questions. So take 3 more minutes and just make sure to maybe answer two other questions real quick. If you, I know it's difficult, but just real quick to get them answers to the questions. Thank you.
How to protect humans from being manipulated by AI? Shall it be governed by legal regulation or self-industry standards? We've addressed some of this, obviously, but maybe the self-industry standard versus legal regulation angle.
I would say just use your brain. You know that if you're on a smartphone, there are psychologists working on keeping you concentrate on a smartphone as long as possible. Just be aware of that. Disable all your notifications. Go to flight mode and play with your kids.
Flight mode, okay.
Maybe your kids, that was the important one,
all right. How about big companies make claims about their approach to data, processing only on device? How can we be sure they're true? So this is the assertion from IBM that we never use. How do I know that IBM is actually telling the truth when it says that it never uses client data?
No chance. You can trust IBM because you trusted IBM for the last 100 years. If you don't trust IBM, then you need to have one of those three encryption schemes in order to get trust.
Right. I mean, ultimately, this is the reality of the world. We live in an environment where we always have to make decisions of trust, and this is one that you can choose otherwise.
Yeah, but the latest advances in cryptography are actually helping a lot there, no? I mean, you know it.
Right. I mean, there is a trust minimization technology that you heard a little bit about before, of course, the blockchain technology that I am involved in quite a lot. So that's one way to approach those sorts of things. How exactly, in your definition, should our future digital world look like? Have you got some encapsulation of what Romeo Kinsler's vision for the 21st century
actually, I'm
like?
working together with a filmmaker from Amsterdam.
Oh, cool.
And she has 3 visions, and I really have the same opinion. So there's the totalitarian world, which maybe happen in China. Then there's the commercially controlled world, which might happen in US. And if we are lucky, maybe from Switzerland, we can start the distributed, decentralized vision, where actually the possession of data goes back to the humans, and also to control what AI is doing goes back to the humans. And I think blockchain is playing a major role.
Is it either 1984 or some sort of utopian vision for humanity? That's ultimately where we go on all these things. I think.
I'm fighting for that.
Good for you. That's the way to go. I
Good for you.
We are talking about machine learning and possibilities of NLP, natural language processing. What is next? Okay, so something very quickly about NLP.
Yeah, so the whole thing is NLP was really basic and sucked a bit, no? Then the deep learning came in and we got better models, better outcomes. But still, it's all about classification and clustering. So I think the new leap is in the area of reinforcement learning. So if you combine reinforcement learning and NLP, that will be the next.
Interesting. It's always a combination of these things coming together, and the models actually are a complex mix of everything, right? Yeah. Good. All right. Well, thank you. Round of applause for Romeo, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.